Hello, welcome to your favorite health program here on Ebru TV. You're watching My Doctor Show, which comes your way every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. My name is Purity Museo, and our topic of discussion today is personality disorders. These are disorders that are mental related, which range from depression, stress, and also bipolar, which also could include some developmental disorders such as autism. The good news is that there are some preventive measures and also treatment options for personality disorders. In studio, we'll be having an expert who will be helping us address some or even highlight some of the disorders there are and how to address them. For now, I'll ask you to sit back, relax, and learn from the exciting show ahead. But just before then, I will welcome you to the show. Call us live through the number that will be displayed right at the bottom of your screen, or use the hashtag MyDoctor to talk to us on Twitter at EbruTV. To the show to help us with the discussion in studio, we have Dr. Elmad Regan, a counselor. Talk to us live. The number is 0791-478-990 on Twitter at EbruTV Kenya, and at Purity_Museo. Use the hashtag MyDoctor. And now help me welcome our special guest on the show today, Dr. Elmad Regan, a counselor. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
We appreciate. And we are talking about personality disorders. We've just seen an overview of what we are going to look at in the show today. Let's begin with the basics. What's a personality disorder?
Well, thanks again for having me on the show. A personality disorder is defined as a maladaptive mental health problem or issue that often causes an individual problems in the way of thinking, the way of feeling, and the way of behavior. So three things to note here. There's the thinking, there's the feeling, and the behavior. So when these three are not in tandem or not in queue, then that individual can be classified as having a personality disorder because they are indifferent to what other people expect them to be. Yes.
And when one of them is not in line with the other, let's say behavior or thinking, do we call it a personality disorder when the three of them are not functioning? Or is there a way I can think but I'm not behaving well, and should we term that a personality disorder?
Well, the three have to come into clear contrast and clear picture, because generally as human beings, we are beings of thought, quite rational in a way of thinking and a way of doing business and things. There's also the aspect of feeling. I mean, if there's that detachment of feeling from a human being, then that's where, people come up with funny terms like he's an animal or she's an animal, because of that detachment of the feeling part. And then eventually now there's also the behavior. So these three have to come into clear focus. If all of them are missing in a person or they're not in queue, then there are also symptoms and signs which would show that this person or that person has a personality disorder. And you see, consequently, when these thoughts, behaviors, and feelings are making a person, appear dangerous, or the person feels uncomfortable with who they are, then that can be termed, a combination of those can be termed as a person having a personality disorder. Yes.
And just before we could have a look at some types of personality disorders there are, when we talk about one's personality, what exactly are we talking about? What types of personalities do we have, and at what point do we say this is now a disorder?
Well, human beings the world over are different and possess different personalities. Now I'd like to debunk something here. There are personalities and then there are temperaments. And you see, often than not, people do confuse temperaments and personalities. And so when you speak about temperaments, these are more or less inborn traits that somebody is born with and they grow up with. Talk of somebody being a sanguine, a choleric, a melancholic, and phlegmatic. Those are now the traits emanating from somebody's temperaments. But then personality on itself, as I mentioned earlier when I was touching on personality disorder, are now a combination of the thoughts, the behaviors, and the feelings that somebody possesses. Now, they're not necessarily inborn, but somebody learns them as they grow up. Yes.
And what are some of the factors? Are you able to define your own personality, or what do you say, Doc, are some of the factors that may contribute to one, getting in line with this kind of a personality? You said you're not born with them, but you acquire them as we grow them. So do we have some factors that lead to one's or directs one to having such a personality?
Yes, there are a number of factors, one of them being the environment that one grows up in. If, for example, one grows up in an abusive environment, then they're more susceptible to having personality disorders. So environment is a very, very crucial and key area to look at in matters of personality. The other one is the orientation of the person, because often than not, we've had cases where people who feel that they're of a different sex, so to speak, have challenges time and again concerning who they really are. So the orientation, which is also influenced by the environment, the parents, what the parents give the child, could also affect. Some cases which are not so common are also attributed to genetic factors. So yes, in as much as the environment also contributes, but also genetic factors also predispose someone to having these personality disorders in question. Yes.
And how do I tell my personality? Is there a way I can know I think I'm this kind of a person, and how?
Well, there are different number of standardized tests which are used to get someone's personality. One of them, being the Myers-Briggs test and the likes, which are luckily available online thanks to the digital era. Yeah. So there are different ways to measure somebody's personality. Of course, the tests are there. But eventually, I'd use 3 very critical keys. If there's something you're doing that makes somebody uncomfortable, not only just one person, maybe a group of people uncomfortable, then you should question, is it really in line? Is it in check? Because my behavior should, in essence, as human nature, be in tandem or at peace with other people. So if my behavior is not in line or in tandem with other people, then there's a problem. If my own behavior at times makes me feel like something is wrong, then I need to check again at myself. Yeah? And then lastly, if my behavior affects me and equally both the people around me, if they're not in queue, then there's a red flag to be raised. So those are the very basic, ways to know what kind of a person I am. But essentially, it's good to take that test, personality test, so that at least you can gauge who am I and what makes me feel this way or that way. Yes.
And again, the question still remains: how are you able to? Do you mean that I have to? Let me use the word please. I have to please everyone around me so that my personality is not in check, or is it just a group of people? Because again, many people tend to say you cannot please everyone.
Very true.
Yeah. So when do you come to a conclusion that it's not just about pleasing people, but I think I have a problem?
Well, as you say it rightly, because what matters personality, it's not a matter of pleasing people. Picture this scenario. It's very cold right now. Then you walk in the street and you meet somebody bare-chested. They are on call, or rather they are on phone, and they are walking okay. What would be a reaction? Something is amiss.
Yeah.
Or it's very, very hot, extremely hot, and somebody has like 4 or 5 jackets. And they're very comfortable, they're okay.
That's a personality issue?
That could trickle down eventually personality issue, unless maybe there are other related medical issues or conditions. But you see, it's not what we would deem a society as being normal, Or like somebody saying that, I want to commit suicide. And you're like, okay, is it as a matter of fact, or are they trying to talk about it? So when these factors are not what we'd expect each other to do, other the society to expect from us, then it could raise a flag. But it's not a matter of pleasing people that I must do this and do that so that I'm sure that I'm in good check in terms of personality. No.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's now have a look at some or a few personality disorders that there are, the common ones. And we'll be looking at one by one, especially the common personality disorders there are, and how do we address them? What are some of the signs and symptoms, and how are they addressed?
Cool. So I'll start with the cluster A. There's normally how we cluster them. There's cluster A, B, and C. So cluster A of personality disorders often falls under what we call suspicion, and also their number. So one of them is a paranoid personality disorder, where a person would feel this urge, or rather this great mistrust in people. They can't really pinpoint why they don't trust you, but they just have issues with you. And fuel to the fact that if they see you maybe chatting with somebody in private or in secret, they'll see that, so I think so-and-so is plotting something against me. So that's one of them. The other one is antisocial personality disorder, which of course, just from the name, antisocial, marked by signs of aggression at times, or even having a criminal record for that reason. So with antisocial personality disorder, the major sign here is aggression and being very overt, verbally and even physically. Then there's also schizoid, which is marked by an individual feeling that there's nothing really wrong with them. But in essence, you, the normal human being, quote unquote, when you look at them, you say that clearly there's something wrong here. Like, for example, a person with schizoid personality disorder might have sleep problems or have inconsistent sleeping patterns. To them, there's no problem with that. But you as a person see it and you tell them, they say, oh, no, I'm okay, I don't see any problem with that. Yeah. And the last one in that cluster A is schizotypal personality disorder, where the individual feels a very huge burden of distress. Always worried, often worried, always in anticipation of something. Even when they hear a bang and, you know, that's it, they are scared. Yeah, so that's the first cluster, and there are signs. Yeah, and with suspicion, there's a risk, because the individual will tend to judge an event which is not even there, and cause even more havoc or even more problems for that reason.
That's paranoid?
Yes, yes. So apart from that cluster, there's also the B cluster, which revolves around the emotion of the person. And here is where we have one which I think was the preview was given before the show, the borderline personality disorder, where an individual is quite, you know, indifferent to what happens around their surrounding. Maybe in the morning they feel very happy, very calm, very excited, but come evening they are sad for no particular reason, and you wonder, okay, is there anything wrong? But you see, to them, that's the way of coping. Then there's also one called the histrionic personality disorder, still under cluster B, where the person wants to be the center of attention. They're the kind of people who will go to a party and they want everything to revolve around them. You know, they'll do even crazy acts so that people would notice them. They're the kind that will go shopping somewhere, get the most, you know, say expensive piece of clothing or jewelry just to stand out. Not because they want to be really smart, but they want that attention to be focused on them and them alone. Yes.
All right, let's begin with the first cluster. The really common one is the paranoid.
Yes.
Paranoid. So what are how do I tell that I am paranoid? What are some of the signs and symptoms? If it's a disorder, do we have some treatment for that? And how do we prevent ourselves from getting into such situations?
Exactly, yeah. So basically, as I said earlier, the paranoid personality disorder is marked by a great deal of mistrust in people. And you see, it has its roots, of course, in, say, childhood or adolescence. Maybe there's something that happened to you as a child or an adolescent that makes you difficult to trust people. So how to tell if I have this kind of personality disorder is when even on the slightest bit of information, you feel, I still need the details. There's still more to it. Like, say, for example, somebody tells you, I'll call you in 5 minutes, and you're like, no. Will they really call me? I doubt. So you have to keep checking and checking and checking. Okay, it's 5 minutes, they have not called. 6 minutes, they have not called. If it causes you extreme worry and anxiety, then it is a cause for alarm, and that's a sure sign that there is a possibility of a personality disorder. Or even other times, you know, even as Kenyans, at times we tend to brush these things off. You board a matatu, you pay your fare, and for some reason, the conductor, you know, forgets about your fare. And then you're always picking over, okay, where is he now? Is he coming? I mean, if it's something that is yours, it's your change, just keep calm and you tell them, you know what, you forgot to give me my change. But for some people, it got so serious that they even get verbal with the conductor and even start hurling insults and verbal abuse. Yes. So when it causes you extreme worry and anxiety, then it is a cause for alarm.
Okay.
And the good thing is that there's treatment for the same. Yes.
And that really happens for the matatu example that you've given. But then maybe this person had an experience. Maybe you were in another matatu and the conductor just did not give you back your balance. Then you just tend to want to remind them all the time. So at what point do you say, I think it's a personality disorder? Yeah.
Well, thanks. You see, the example I've just given is just, you know, one of the very typical ones. You see, for some people, it's so serious. Like you see, you were saying, maybe on another matatu and you ask for the fare not given in time, and then you know, board another one and the same scenario occurs. That is something that, you know, is bound to happen once in a while. But if it is often consistent, even maybe you've boarded the matatu and you're still feeling, okay, will they give me a change today? You're still at the bus stop, you've not boarded, but you're still asking, okay, I have this amount of money. If I give it to them, will they really give me change? Yeah. So the undertone here is that extreme worry and anxiety connected to it. Because the moment you're worried and are anxious, it will be very difficult for you to trust people therefore. You see, for some people, because of environmental factors, say like war, people have been into war-torn areas, like the soldiers, for example. When they lose a colleague or a friend in battle and they come back, there's that traumatic, you know, picture that is often played in their mind of how maybe they lost their colleague or just how the environment of the place was. And so you see, when they are told to maybe like, you know, engage in something that is a bit physical, they'll connect that activity to what happened previously while at the war camp or such. So when there's that extreme worry, the catchword here is that worry. When it is extreme and in excess, it will definitely cause you to mistrust people. And the moment you start mistrusting, say like your spouse, your child, at times even yourself, then it's a cause for alarm. Yes.
And so when do you need to see a doctor? What are how do you diagnose this paranoid kind of a personality disorder? First, let's get to the treatment before you could see how some of the preventive measures there are.
Right. Now, you see, these personality disorders, you know, even the one speaking about the paranoid personality disorder, is quite, you know, difficult to self-diagnose. Let me say so. For full diagnosis, it's always important and crucial to visit a psychiatrist for full diagnosis, because maybe there could be signs of another personality disorder or just the normal signs that we have, you know, as a result of the day-to-day life struggles. So it is very important to visit a psychiatrist for full diagnosis. But all the same, when the signs start worrying you, when, as I mentioned, you start doubting your wife, doubting your child, doubting your neighbor, doubting your landlord, doubting everyone and everything around you, then it's a cause for alarm. But it's not a sure fact that when you have all these symptoms that, yes, you have personality disorder. It's always recommended and advisable to go for, you know, for assessment. Just like when you have a fever or flu, you might try to say that, maybe I'm guessing it's malaria, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's typhoid fever. So the same way you go for treatment for other infections or diseases is the same way that you should go for checkup when these symptoms occur. Yes.
Okay. Preventive measures for paranoid or paranoid kind of a disorder. How do we prevent ourselves from getting into such situations? You know, you're saying that you tend to doubt a lot, you know, the things that have not really happened yet. So is there a way that you can protect yourself from getting such a disorder, which is, I believe, very common?
Well, yes, there's a number of ways to prevent yourself from reaching that level of now, you know, being classified as having paranoid personality disorder. And one of them, I'd say, is being self-aware, which again would bring a whole lot of, you know, discussion. So, okay, so how do I become self-aware, therefore? Because as a human being, there are times when there are moments when you feel like, oh, no, I think I've had enough of this, I need to take a break, I need to take a rest. Or you've done something and you're feeling like, I need to congratulate myself for this achievement or that achievement. But then bring this to the picture that there are times that, you know, you go above and beyond and you feel nothing at all. Or now when they're in excess, you start now even doubting yourself. It could either be, yes, you're doing it to the extreme and you're feeling nothing at all, or you've not done it yet, but you're still doubting and feeling like, hey, will I really hack? So when it is also in excess, it's also important to know. So therefore, the preventive measure, one, as I said, is to know yourself, know my limits. When I'm this high, what are the effects? Or when I'm this low, what does it cost me? Or rather, what does it make me feel? Two, some exercises, say like yoga, are very, very important and very, very crucial. Some people say that that yoga is the Western thing, is not, you know, an African thing per se, but they're really, really beneficial and quite helpful. Issues meditation, very important. You see, when you ask people randomly, how often do you meditate? Some will even say they don't know what meditation is for that reason. But you see, issues like meditation, just taking some time alone and reflecting about who you are, what you want, and stuff like that, are very, very essential and key into, you know, whole development and avoiding such issues like paranoid personality disorder. Yes.
And Doc, once again, because you said you've classified them into cluster A and cluster B,
yes.
Once again, just list for us the cluster A personality disorders.
Yes, so cluster A has the paranoid personality disorder. There's the antisocial personality disorder. There's the schizoid personality disorder and schizotypical personality disorder. Yes, that's the cluster A.
Right. And now when we move on to the antisocial, some people will say that I'm not outgoing, I'm an introvert. So how are you able to tell this is an antisocial personality disorder and it's not just, or do you want to say that the introverts are, or they have a problem with their personalities?
A good question. And see, with people who are introverts, you cannot really say that for sure because you are introverted, then that means you are antisocial or have the antisocial personality disorder. Of course, there are also markers to that. And you see, as I mentioned, it is marked by levels of aggression. Because say when people go for a party, they have fun. Yours is to spoil the party. As in, when you see things in disarray, that gives you joy and gives you satisfaction or happiness. When there's chaos, that's where you thrive. When others are happy and elated and having fun, yours is to disrupt it or just bring something to bring some commotion and chaos, then that makes you happy. Then that is an antisocial type. Because there is no way a normal human being would be happy when others are crying. You know, it's like saying you go to, say, a funeral. the emotion there is, you know, quite sad, and people are in this somber mood. But that's the moment you laugh out loud and you start cracking jokes. People wonder, is this guy okay? Yeah. Or maybe guys are in a wedding, people are happy, and you go there, you go crying. So such issues.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. And just before we have a look at who is at a risk, you mentioned it's schizoid? Or what did
Schizoid.
Schizoid,
Yes.
Personality disorder. Now, all these are cluster A. When you talk of cluster A, are they the most serious personality disorders that we have? Are they the most treatable personality disorders that we have? Or why the cluster A and cluster B? And how am I able to now differentiate that? I think this one, you said it's not self-treated, or you cannot diagnose it yourself. You have to go out and seek for help.
Yes.
But now, Doc, just tell us, how are you, or which one do you term between cluster A and B that it's the most problematic, or are they equally, do they have equal impact on the person?
Well, I wouldn't really pinpoint and say that one is more, you know, severe than the other, because if you look at some in cluster B and some in cluster A, they are almost on the same level, because the undertone here would still go back to the environment where one grew up in, issues, genetics, was it passed down, or past traumatic experiences. Because I understand in some places, say like the US, the most common one is schizophrenia, which is a disorder on its own. Maybe because of the environment there. You know, some researchers have developed some theory and saying that, you know, people who live, for example, in cold places or, you know, places which receive little amount of light are more susceptible to being depressed, for example. So it would depend also with environmental factors. So I wouldn't really say that one is, you know, more prone, like in Kenya, for example, or rather one is more susceptible to being diagnosed with this and this disorder. So I'd say it's different, depending on the environment and the past experiences that one has undergone. Yes.
And now looking at who is at a risk, I know you talked of environmental factors, family history, but who exactly would you say is at a risk of getting some personality disorders? Let's not talk about the genetical part of it, but the environmental factors, who exactly, in terms of the age bracket, in terms of gender, and also in terms of maybe your well-being, whether you're sick or not?
Yes, yeah, so the group that is highly at risk are children and teenagers. Why these two classes? Because see, as a child grows, they're still learning to know themselves better, learning to develop themselves better. And you see, when some certain milestones are not met when one is a child, then this child is likely to grow up maybe coy and shying off from the society, or adopting some weird behaviors which are not really expected of the child as per how a normal child should be or should behave. Teenagers are also susceptible because that's the time now they're grappling with their identity, their real identity. Do I initiate this? Do I not do this? You know, do I maybe go to high school? Do I, you know, drop out and stuff like that? So these two stages are very, very crucial. So it's basically children from, say, the age of 7 to youths, teenagers, say, to something about 18, 24, to say 27. Yes.
Right. And when we come back, we look at the risk factors. Why children? What are some of the predisposing factors to personality disorders? Most importantly, we'll now shift our attention to cluster B, personality disorders. That's it for the first part of the show. But stay tuned because we continue in just a moment. And welcome back to the second and the last part of the show. You're still watching My Doctor Show, and my name is Purity Museo. And just in case you're joining us for the very first time, our topic of discussion today is personality disorders, and in studio we do have a counselor. His name is Elmad Regan, to just help us address personality disorders. How do you tell that you have some of the personality disorders? And also, just tell us what some of the options that there are. He will be telling us the options there are for people like these treatment options. But as usual, before we get straight to our discussion, let's get in the last part of the show. Remember, we are talking about personality disorders. Those were just some of the types of the disorders there are. And in studio, we have Dr. Elmad Regan to just help us see how do we address and also some of the treatment options. Thank you for staying with us, Doc. And now let's get, we talked about the risk, who is at a risk of getting a personality disorder, and you said children. So what are some of the predisposing factors that led or that ensure or that predispose children to be at a higher risk of having personality disorders?
Well, thank you. The reason why children are at a high risk of, being diagnosed with personality disorders, or not just for that reason, is because of the kind of environment that they grow in. If, for example, this child grows up in an overly abusive environment, say the parents get physical each and every time, and this child sees it, you see the natural tendencies for the child will be to defend one party or one parent whom they feel emotionally attached to. And since they cannot quite do that because they're feeling or they're seeing that this is quote unquote a grown-up fight, they will coy and shy away. And so the moment they shy away, it therefore develops with them as they grow older. Yeah? The other factor why children are at risk is because they have not yet learned the art of expressing themselves, because they're still growing, they're still young. They still need to be taught, what this means and what this doesn't mean. And so the moment that they now have to learn on themselves that doing this is wrong or doing that is right, then it becomes a bit difficult for them because they need guidance. And see, that's why some experiments were done, which, in my opinion, were not really the best, so to speak. There was one that was done with a child taken to Congo Forest and, for some time, learned to associate with the monkeys. Okay, true, though it might have helped us, develop some milestones in terms of medicine and psychology. But just picture that, taking a child from his normal environment to an environment which they're unfamiliar with. And so even as they grow, it affects everything about them. So as kids learn, it's very, very important to show them how to grow holistically. But the moment that they try to learn on themselves and on their own, then they become less advantaged in matters, self-awareness and self-efficacy, which of course is a long-term thing. So that predisposure to violence when they're young, and that being left alone to learn on their own, equally makes them a bit more at risk. Yes.
And now let's get to how do you, before we look at the complications, the health complications that come with personality disorders. I know you already talked about cluster A, but now moving on to cluster B, personality disorders. How do you identify, when do you need to see a doctor, and what are some of the diagnostic features for cluster B personality disorders?
Well, yes. So maybe just to refresh our memory a bit, cluster B entails, one, the borderline personality disorder, where a person, displays different moods at different levels or different moments. Then there's the histrionic, which the person wants just to be the center of attention. Everything revolves around them. And then there's the narcissistic type, which the person feels more important than anybody else. That's the moment that they become so bossy, the moment that they feel like they're the VIPs of the world and stuff like that.
Does it boost? Many people believe when they are bossy, then it boosts their esteem.
Well, if it gets to that level now, when now it is more than the required one, then it is a cause for problem. Just imagine somebody coming into a room and ordering all of you to do something weird. Say, for example, I want all of you to jump up and down, and he's serious about it. Not that he's joking, he's very serious about it. And see, that is a bit unusual and abnormal of human beings. Yes. So how to diagnose this, again, would be now the extent or the frequency at which it happens. You see, if it's now worrying, like say, for example, the borderline, that every morning you are very happy, every evening you are very sad, like for narcissistic, histrionic, each and every time, each and every moment, you want everything to be about you, and you alone, then that's a cause for worry. And for even narcissistic, you always want to be, the red flag, or rather the stubborn hole in the wall. You always want to be, it's always about me. Yes, I'm here. I need you to feel me, guys. If it's always about you and you alone, then it's a cause for alarm. So there's that frequency which should be attained for you to say that clearly, I think I'm moving towards, being predisposed to this disorder.
And maybe you can just move on with the types. When you talk about diagnosing, then what are the treatment options for cluster B?
Exactly. Yeah, so there are different treatment options for the cluster B personality disorders. Of course, one of them being medication from a psychiatrist, which there's prescription for antipsychotic drugs or antidepressants, or at times even mood stabilizers for a personality disorder like borderline personality disorder. Other than that, there's also art therapy, where the individual is exposed to, just try out some skills on their own, say like in music or say in drawing or painting, just to get them to be at par with where they should be. At times even cognitive behavior therapy, just to make the individual understand how their cognitions affect their feelings and their behaviors. Yes.
And now getting to the effects of personality disorders, what are some of the effects? We'll be looking at the complications, health complications, but before then, to what extent can they maybe lead you to the wrong direction, if I may say so?
Well, so there are varied effects which range from suicide to being aggressive, that is both verbally and even physically. There is that detachment, extreme detachment from reality and persons around you. For some people, they go to engage in extraneous events which are a bit dangerous, say like extreme levels of gambling or engaging in some unnatural, so to speak, forms of sex. So all these are as a result of these disorders not being tackled as they ought to be tackled. But of course, the most common one is suicidal thoughts or suicide in itself. Yes.
And now do we have, because you've talked about the effects which range from suicide, now what are some of the health, because I know they are mental disorders, what are some of the health complications that may come with some of these extreme personality disorders?
Well, the health complications also are quite a number. That means that if, say, somebody has a disorder, say like antisocial personality disorder, you see, it not only affects their way of thinking and their way of behavior, but also other aspects of health. Because some researchers have shown that some patients who are on, say, a certain type of personality disorder are somewhat resistant to some levels of normal medication. Yeah, and even those who are on medication, at times on the antipsychotic medication, so to speak, some of them still have difficulties, going back to where they ought to be, because some would say that they feel nothing, maybe as a result of the side effects of the medication, or as now even taking the medication per se, not really for them to heal well, but now they feel like it's their form of coping, it's their new way of coping up. Yeah, so there's complications which often arise, but then they're not all that common. But all the same, there is hope, as I said. There is therapy, which would help the individual, and of course medication, which I believe, if given in the right way and in the right measure, then there is still hope for that individual.
Let's talk about the medication. What is the medication for some of these personality disorders? Because most people believe they are mental-related conditions, and the only help that people or one can get is counseling.
Yes, so for medication, there is different medication for different personality disorders. The treatment, say, for like borderline personality disorder will be a bit different from the schizotypal type of personality disorder. So depending on the disorder, there'll be the medication which matches. But generally, there's the antipsychotic drugs, the antidepressants, because a disorder like the antisocial personality disorder would make an individual, somewhat withdrawn. And when somebody is withdrawn, then the aftermath, therefore, is depression. So when antidepressants come into play, then this individual would be, sort of blocked from going to that extent of being depressed. And then there are also mood stabilizers for cases like bipolar disorder or the borderline personality disorder, just to make the individual more stable and more calm. for that reason.
Okay, let's now get to managing and also coping after you've gone for your medication and also your counseling sessions. How do you, as a person yourself who has had or has been identified with one of the personality disorders, how do you cope and manage to get out of the situation once you go back home? And as a person who is taking care of this kind of a person, how do you help them? How do you handle this kind of a person?
True, yeah. So for the individual who's been diagnosed and has gone to hospital for medication, also again, depending on the extent of the damage, quote unquote, that has been on the individual, it might need one to be admitted, depending on the severity of the disorder. Some which are quite mild, of course, the person will be discharged after a while. So it will call for routine checkups and sessions, counseling sessions, to help the individual cope up even better. That is on the individual basis. So routine therapy sessions and counseling sessions would be very, very vital and effective. Now, for the person who is taking care of this person with this disorder, it is also always a no-no to remind the person that, you're very stubborn. You always do this and do this and do that. It's not right. It calls for standing with them and telling them that, hey, it's time for medication, for example, or next week you have an appointment with the doctor. Would you like me to take you? So just being emotionally there for them would mean a lot. But the moment that you start showing signs of, you're just a burden to me, I'm tired of yours and stuff like that, it will be a bit tricky. So for the caregiver, it calls for a lot of patience and understanding, notwithstanding also. Because the moment that you show any sign of, not cooperating with the patient, they are likely to go back to where they were, even after medication.
Yeah.
Yes. So for the person, it calls for understanding that this is the effect. Now there's medication. It therefore means that I need to go for routine checkups time and again. For the caregiver, it's a matter of support, and more support. Yes. And
there's a misconception that these people with, especially the extreme side of it, like for example, you are overexcited or let me talk about antisocial, then these people are labeled crazy, so how do you address, there's so much stigma, especially in an African setting, for people with these personality disorders, especially the ones at the extreme end. How do you address the stigma that come with such situations?
Right, yeah, so and I'm glad you brought that out, because even going by the statistics, 5 out of 6 Kenyans, according to the Kenya Mental Health Policy survey, says that 5 out of 6 Kenyans who are diagnosed with a mental problem will not go for treatment for the same, because of that stigma that they'll be labeled as crazy, or as, we like calling them, mwenda wazimu or mwenda or something of the sort. So it therefore calls for now us as players in this field to sensitize people on these disorders. Because you see, it's just like HIV and AIDS, where when it was first diagnosed in Kenya in 1984, it was this very scary disease. But with the more sensitization and more campaigns on the same, people came to embrace the idea that, it's just an illness like any other disease. And so we need to therefore handle it with a lot of care. So the same with mental disorders, it calls for a lot of sensitization. And here we are now key players in the government, in the private sector, religious sector, school sectors, and all these players need to come on board and really say that, these are problems that are there and they are happening, and it therefore calls for us to sensitize people. Because really, the reason why people label these friends of ours or family members as crazy is because they don't have the information yet. And you see, the moment that you have information, you are better equipped and you understand the person even better. Yes.
And when do you really become crazy? Do we have anything like being crazy? Because one of our viewers is asking, there's someone who keeps on smiling, whether you've done anything wrong to them or not. Is it one of the symptoms or signs for personality disorder?
Well, to tackle the first question, is there a level like being called crazy? Psychologically, I wouldn't say that there's a level like being crazy. We normally say that it's a condition which needs to be addressed. Of course, crazy is just a term that was coined to try fit in to describe what a person is, for lack of a better word. So like you've asked, the second question, if somebody just keeps on smiling time and again, whether you wrong them or not, well, unless a diagnosis is done on that person, then you cannot really pinpoint and say that, huyu ni mwenda, definitely. So there needs to be that diagnosis to show that, yes, there is a problem or there is no problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now let's make some awareness to our viewers. You said a lot of stigma that come with any personality disorder or any mental related disorder. So what do we need to know? You are a counselor. What do we need to know as people that we do not know that will help us appreciate any other person, even the ones that they say are crazy, you know? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so what we need to know as a person, first of all, I think if all of us got their hands on the statistics that we have currently, then we would change our perspective all the same. Because globally, about 300 million people suffer from psychological disorders. And in Kenya, I give you the statistics, like 5 out of 6 will not seek treatment, only one will seek treatment. And even look at the death, the death indicator survey, it matters suicidal thoughts from these personality disorders. 11 men out of, say, 100,000 in Kenya will commit suicide because of issues of stigma. 3 women out of 100,000 will still commit suicide out of personality disorders. Now, you might say that, that's quite a small number. But look at it this way. If those 7 men are breadwinners in their families, if these 7 men are fathers who pay school fees, if these 7 men are, say, top managers and top CEOs, then where does that leave us on the economical scale of the country? If 3 of these ladies who commit suicide out of these personality disorders leave children behind who are too young to fend for themselves, that means they are orphans who will be left behind. That means there'll be that gap between society, having mothers, so to speak. So when we understand these statistics, then our perception towards personality disorders will change eventually. Yeah. So apart from that, we also need to be a bit, let me say, aggressive on matters information, because a lot of or most Kenyans, it's quite sad, don't read on this issue. They said, Mimi, so long as I'm okay, I can eat well, I can sleep well, I can live well, then there's nothing wrong. But you see, the moment that you get a hand on this information, your whole person changes, your perspective changes about the issues. Yes. So in as much as you're also trying to create awareness, also you as the individual, you also need to play his or her role.
Yeah.
Be a champion of this, get the information needed, and start by embracing whatever is there, and see therefore how can I help.
And now, talking about seeking help, let's come back to Kenya. The accessibility of these medical facility or psychological related medical facilities. How would you say that we as a country, we have prepared? Because you're saying that 5 in every 6 people will not seek help. But do we have ready equipment or ready medical facilities that, because if I'm not wrong, we have, if not 2 medical facilities that really focus on psychological issues. Do you say that there is a gap in terms of providing psychological services to our Kenyans?
Well, I'd still say that there's still a huge gap, and we still have to do a lot as a country to help people suffering from personality disorders, because the country has about 16 recognized institutions which offer treatment for mental disorders. Of course, one of them being public, that is Mathare Hospital, being the only public institution that offers, help on mental disorders on a public scale. So the rest are private, and even the more reason why people don't access help is because of the cost. Because once it's privatized, for most people it's not affordable, because true, it is quite costly. And you see, it's even more sad that the government has not set up funds or allocations for specifically mental disorders or mental illness. So when such issues are brought on board, and you see therefore how can we decentralize provision of services, maybe in the county level, then would be at a safer place as a country, so to speak. So in terms of infrastructure on mental health, we are still way, way below average.
And
we
the
still
cost
need to do
effectiveness
more.
as
Exactly,
well.
exactly.
All right.
Yes.
So I'll ask you once again, because you said that the personality disorders, they are mental related conditions. How much, because we're still staying with the crazy part of it, now the kind of damage it causes to one's health, especially the mental ability of a person, to what extreme or extent does these personalities really affect one's life, especially the mental ability?
Well, so those who are on medication, of course, there are those side effects which after some time, of course, will go away. But those who are not yet on medication now will engage in some activities or acts which will be dangerous to their health. Some who say like have schizophrenia, for example, will go to the extent of doing damage to their bodies. Say like doing lacerations on their bodies. To them, they think it's okay. Oh, I'm bleeding. This is cool. You know, I think I like it. But they're doing damage to their bodies, and they don't know about it. That means that the extent has gone so much to affect other parts and other functions of the brain. You see, when now we go into deeper aspects of even discussing the brain, things like coordination and judgment and perception, as a result of this disorder not being well taken care of or well treated, then it leads to issues like I've mentioned, lacerating yourself, just for the sake of it or just to feel happy. Others attempting suicide, others going into serious issues of, say, gambling, unsafe sex, some DUI, driving under the influence. They think it's okay, but really there's still a problem. So it's quite varied. There's still a lot. Yeah, but the aftermath is that when they're not well articulated or responded to, it has the effect on the entire brain. And chances are, when it gets to that level where now the brain is, working as a single unit, it becomes a bit difficult. Yes.
And when the brain is not working at all, is that why we see people on the streets? Many people call them mad people. I don't know what you experts call them. But what exactly happens that people find themselves in such? In the first place, I'll ask you, what would you tell of those people on the streets? Are they first mad people, or what would you call them? And number two, what happens? Is it the damage of the brain, or what exactly happens? Do these people reason like another person, and how do you help such people? Are they beyond, control? Are they beyond the damage? Is it too much that you cannot reverse it? Is it permanent, or what would you say?
Well, from where I sit, I wouldn't really say that they are mad per se, because at least there's still some part of the brain which tells them, you know what, you're hungry, you need to go to the dustbin to get some crumbs or something just to eat. When it's raining, you'll rarely see them on the streets because they know it's time to take shelter. So the damage that has been done to them is to that extent where now they're sort of detached from reality. They are now in their own world, but still functioning, though at a lower level, but they're just detached from reality because of the disappointment that they got. Maybe they shared with somebody that, you know what, I have had this and this problem, but because that person never took their time to understand what the problem was, or they never got the mental health assistance that they needed, they then therefore detach slowly by slowly till they end up in the streets. So I wouldn't really say that they're mad. They're just detached from reality.
What
and yes,
word
they still...
what psychological word do you give them? How do you call them?
Well, I'd use socially detached.
All right.
Yes, because it is varied. Some would be on the street, yes, but they are still, let me say, quote unquote, sane enough to ask you for some money. Some will not ask you for any money, but they'll know that I think it's one. Let me go to the dustbin and get my lunch. Yes.
Some, but not all of them.
Not all of them. So
but
that's
do
what
we
I'm saying.
have,
It's different. Yes.
Do we have a category of people or group? What happens? I believe that once your brain is completely detached, then I don't think you can survive. So do we say that a larger percentage of people out there on the streets, they are somehow aware of what they are doing, and most people will just say they are pretending? There's that word that, you know what, they're just pretending, they're faking it, they know what they're doing. Is that true?
Well, I wouldn't say they're faking it, because once the brain has reached that level of disappointment and being detached from reality, then therefore means I have to now fend for myself. In essence, these people need help, but then they don't know how to go about it. Because they're feeling that if I approach so and so, how will they perceive me? Because if they still have the cognizance to know that it's cold, let me get some, some shuka or something to just put on my body, that means that there's still some functioning in them. They need help like any other person. And you see, there have been cases which have been reported. I know of one who was rehabilitated from the streets to going back and just fitting perfectly well in the society. I mean, if you see the before and after picture of this person, you won't believe that it's the same person. So it is a process, I'd say, to help them get back to where they are. But the notion of saying that they're faking it, they know what they're doing, is a no-no. They need help, just like you and me on a daily basis need help, but at times you might feel like, I'm not so sure how to go about it. Yes.
And does it start with the simple personality disorders that you have mentioned, then leading to the effects and then long-term complications? Or how do you find yourself? How does it start in the first place?
Yes, for some it starts with the very simple personality disorders that we've spoken about, but for some it starts with very minute details, the ones that we ignore. Say something like stress. You are stressed, you don't want to share with a friend or relative that, you know what, I'm stressed, and to keep it to yourself. And so the moment it piles up and continues, it leads to eventually issues like depression. Yeah. So the very, very minute details that we ignore on a daily basis, because you see, as I mentioned earlier, some things we take for granted, things like meditation, doing yoga, you know, having some time with yourself, we tend to overlook them as very simple things, but the aftermath, the long-term effect is quite big. Yes.
And finally, how and where do we find you, Regan?
Well, you can find me, right now I'm working for an organization called Carolina for Kibera. That's where I work currently. We do diagnosis for these issues and other related issues, from the very simple ones like, say, stress, daily life stressors, to the more complex ones, say like the borderline personality disorders. But where I am, we don't give medication per se.
Okay.
Because ours is just to diagnose the problem and go ahead to now refer to institutions which now offer professional assistance or help. Because as psychologists, ours is to but diagnose. And so that's why we work hand in hand with psychiatrists now, who will give medication. They know which amount, what quantity, at what time.
Okay.
Yes.
And maybe do you have an address or even a number that our viewers can get you through?
Yeah, sure. So the number is, my personal number, that's the office number, it's 0789 395 579. I'll repeat that again, 0789 395 579.
Right, Regan, thank you so much for making time for us. That's all the time we had for the show. We highly appreciate your time. Yeah. And thank you for watching. Thank you for your feedback. We appreciate. Do have yourself a lovely time. God bless you. I'm Purity Museo.